Hello and welcome to the Moonshots podcast. It's episode 271. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the man himself, Mr. Mark Pearson Freeland. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Mike, and good morning, Moonshots listeners, viewers on YouTube, as well as our amazing members and Patreon subscribers. Mike, I'm not going to lie to you or anybody dialing in and tuning in today. We have, I think, a very clear, very actionable, very reassuring episode ahead of us for today.
You're clearly well prepared, and it would only suggest that you're thinking clearly. So, Mark, why don't you reveal what clarity is about to become of our listeners and members?
Well, I think the mist is clearing from my mind. My indecisions and cognitive biases are getting out of the way as we lean into this week's episode on Rolf Dobelli's The Art of Thinking Clearly. For those who aren't familiar with Rolf, he's a Swiss author as well as an entrepreneur who's got a background in business, a little bit of philosophy, Mike. That's a Moonshot's favorite for us. But his book is all essentially a guide, I suppose you could call it, that helps you and I, all of our listeners and members and the Moonshots family, help us avoid errors that we might naturally, or totally naturally, I should say, uncognitively make in our days in order to cloud our judgment and help us make the wrong decisions. I mean, Mike, this is something that I certainly probably struggle with each day, and I don't even know about it.
Well, I can tell you, Mark, the Art of Thinking Clearly by Dobelli is one of my favorite reads of this year. So this is a strong recommend from Mike Parsons. And where I want to go with this is if you like Shane Parrish's Greatest Mental Models episode that we did some few years ago, this will blow you away, this book, because if you want to make better decisions, if you want to be sort of Buffett-like or Elon Musk-like, this is the book for you. Because the thing that struck me about this book is as you are becoming aware of all the different ways to think, it takes a lot of the mystery out of tough decisions. And the crazy thing, Mark, is this book has like 100 mental models in it for you to use. And you feel like, well, I have to carry this book around with me for every decision I'm going to make in life, because until reading this book, I must have made so many bad decisions because I was unaware of these biases and so forth. So that's all a long way of saying, if you want to think better, make better decisions, this is the show for you, Mark. I can't wait to jump in. Now, you've found a bunch of great clips here. Where do you want to kick off the moment of clarity that we're going to have together?
Yeah, I think, like you say, there's going to be a lot of surprise, perhaps, in the way that we all function in our day-to-day lives without these models illuminating the right path. And one of the key areas that Rolf tries to lean in towards is helping us simplify those complex moments. So this first clip we've got is really helping you and I and all of our listeners understand today that sometimes this idea of choice is not always such a good thing. In fact, a paradox of choice can be totally overwhelming. So before we talk about actionable insights and ways to help us think clearly, let's set the scene by hearing from Rolf himself, help us understand the issues with the paradox of choice.
If you have too many options, you get distracted. And sometimes you have to learn how to close doors, how to close options. We have a tendency to leave all the options open. In a relationship, we'll have this option open, and then, I'm married, but I'm also going to have, a little affair here and there, or I have a job, but then I have some side jobs, I'm doing side careers, or I study something, but I'm also studying 3 other things on the side because it gives me options. This notion of having as many options available to you as possible is not a good one because it distracts you. It's better to close some of the doors. I'm not saying all doors except one, but close some doors because doors distract you. You can't focus a lot of energy onto your main door, into your main room then. So closing doors is important. The other one is the paradox of choice. The more choice we have, the harder it is for us to make a decision. If you go to your supermarket, you have an abundance of, let's say, yogurts. You have 300 different choices of yogurt, and you will never be happy because you'll never be sure whether the yogurt you pick, that specific brand you pick, was the perfect one. So it makes you happier if you have maybe 3 or 6 types of yogurt left, only 3 or 6 types of yogurt on the shelf. That makes you much happier than picking out of 300. So limiting choice has a certain way of making you happier.
Even though I'm not currently living in America, keep one thing about this choice idea. America is built currently on the idea of waking up on a Saturday morning and going to Walmart, where you are faced with more choices of assorted plastic formations than you will ever know what to do with. But that's what people love. People love the idea of walking into these mega warehouses with choices for just everything, that it never ends. And I think if the typical Walmart was 6 times the size of the current one, they'd love that even more.
Yeah, I think so too. It almost has something like entertainment to me. It's almost like a video game. You walk into a major mega store of a Walmart, you go around. It's more of a game, more of a huge. It's almost like watching a movie. You walk through the aisles. It's like watching a movie. It doesn't really add to your life, to the quality of your life. It just distracts.
But the people there think just the opposite of what you said.
Yeah, they do. But science is clear on it. You're much happier when you have a limited choice after having made a choice than when you have a huge sample of things to pick from.
So, Mark, this is a very good place to start, because one of the things that we totally have within our circle of control is how many options we want to present ourselves with. Now, a great example of that is your wardrobe. If you always spend 20 minutes looking at your wardrobe going, what am I going to wear? That would tell me you probably could cull that wardrobe. And you might remember the show that we did on the one thing, right? As a sort of sorting principle of saying, what is the one thing I could do now that would make things easier in the future, and really getting focused. I think this is all my way of saying that there are choices that you can make. There are decisions on how many options you bring to yourself, what you get focused on. And this is all by this kind of transition to being in control and taking ownership for the things around you. Not only the stimulus coming in, but how you go about thinking. And this is the power of this book. If you have made the choice to take ownership of how you think, what you think about, how you spend your time and attention, the paradox of choice, Mark, it's just one step. It's one example of what you can do in order to liberate your mind, because I think our minds are overrun. If you think about our lives pre-internet and look at where we are now 20 years later, we have so many notifications, emails, services, pings, dings, and dongs. Like, our brains are just like going bananas. So this is why mental models matter. This is why reducing the choices, simplifying and focusing. I mean, this really threads so many different ways into like what we've learned on the show, right?
Yeah, big time. I mean, we know that our brains are not a supercomputer.
Right.
So naturally, we do all get overwhelmed by too much information. Like you say, the dings and the dongs. Also, right now, as we record, you got Black Friday deals, you've got Christmas around the corner, Thanksgiving. So we're all getting bombarded with advertisements for new items and more options. Oh, do you need this TV or that TV? Why don't you upskill or upsize your wardrobe, or all of the skills that you already know, so on and so forth. So all of these opportunities from businesses to help sell us a new product or service equally is very, very overwhelming. And you're right, Mike. We talked about, simplifying your wardrobe so it's nice and easy when you look in and you just see the moonshots outfits of black t-shirts and yellow backgrounds. It's all very, very simple. But limiting options is a real way to help do that. Another thing that I read that helps with the paradox of choice, Mike, which I thought was quite interesting, is embracing the idea of good enough.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
So rather than being, and I know our personality types, Mike, and our listeners probably know as well, you and I can be, maybe we've got traits, a little bit of perfectionists, and, we kind of beat ourselves up if it's not quite right. But if you adopt a satisfier mindset, I think is what they call it, then you can find, maybe a little bit like the happiness equation, more comfort and gratitude in the results and the outputs of the things that you do, in order to then remove elements of other choices, because you realize, oh, I don't need to worry about 1, 2, and 3. Instead, I'm happy with how number 1 turned out. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Is that something that speaks volumes to you, Mike? This idea of embracing good enough?
Well, that is just another great example of a mental model that you can deliberately take on. You're going to look at your work through a good enough model, and you would do this because you want to ship the work and avoid being caught in this perfectionist loop, so you never ship anything, right? So that's sort of the risk. But what's interesting? Like, there are so many ideas in this book. Like, just to give you an idea, we were talking about just a couple then. There's one called the swimmer's body illusion, which is hilarious, right? So people think, oh, look, if I swim, I'm going to look like the swimmers. But what he points out is many of the reasons swimmers look like they look is because they biologically are better suited to swimming, so they tend to swim. But we all think, if I swim, I'm going to look like them. But he's like, you got no chance, because you just don't even have the biological starting point.
Interesting.
Other ones, clustering illusion, the recency effect, the availability heuristic, the halo effect, framing, the winner's curse, the planning fallacy. Mark, there are so many options in how we want to look at the world, how we want to see data, how we want to make decisions. And what I want to say to you is, if you thought the Great Mental Models by Shane Parrish was good, this is like literally 99 mental models to help you make better decisions. And I would have to say one of the best decisions you could make off the bat would be becoming a member of the Moonshots podcast. Would you not say, Mark?
That's right, Mike, because, to coin one of the other phrases from within the book, chauffeur knowledge, Mike, which is one of my favorites. The idea of genuinely understanding a subject rather than merely parroting it. Yes. The difference here is that we actually have members who know the subject matter. These are individuals who sign up for that piece of information from the Moonshot Show, and I know that they're putting into practice every single day. So let me just dust off my trumpet. Here you go. Please welcome in all of our members who are winning each day. Bob, Dietmar, Marjan and Connor, Lisa, Sid, Mr. Bonjour and Paul, Berg, Kalman, Joe, Christian, Samuela, Barbara, Deborah and Lasse, Steve, Craig, Ravi and Yvette, Raul, Nicarada, Ingram and Dirk, Venkata, Marco, Jet and Roger, Steph, Rod, Diana and Christoph, Denise, Laura, Smitty, Mike, Antonio, Zachary, Austin and Fred, Ola, Andy, Diana, Margie, Jasper, Fabian, Guhong and Eddie, as well as our brand new members, Lars and Sabiha. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on the Moonshot Show. We have an action-packed show 271 ahead of us. But Mike, it just keeps on giving, doesn't it? The Moonshot Show. Not only do we give them a little bit of lunar-powered goodness, but also you get access to the Master Series.
Yeah, you certainly do. And a couple of newbies, a couple of fresh moonshotters in there as well. So big shout out to you too. Coming back to the bookmark, it's insane to think like the amount of wisdom that is available to you. And I really do hope that what we're doing on the show here for all of our listeners, members, and viewers helps them see that there are so many tools in the universe to go out and to be the best version of yourself. The crazy thing about this book, though, is if you kind of categorize the 99 models, they're like, basically look like this. There's biases that we might have. There might be emotional triggers that we have, classic decision-making errors, logic pitfalls, misperceptions, fallacies, self-identity biases, risk mistakes, and behavioral economics points of view. Mark, that's why I was so blown away by this book, because I was like, oh my gosh, first response is, how bad is my decision making when I look at how good he is? And then when I get over the pain and suffering there, I'm like, wow. One of the big things here is like we can be just more self-aware of how we can deceive ourselves and be holding biases. So if you take a little bit of caution there, that can set you up, like whenever you see some data or there's a potential problem coming and you need a solution, an answer, or a decision, even if the only thing you take from this book and this show is like pause, take a breath, you have all of these starting points which may lead to a poor decision. So if you just try and be more deliberate, more objective, you can get a better result. And Mark, I think this next clip that you've got for us really kind of sets us up to being more self-aware.
Yeah, I think that's a great introduction, Mike. And you're right. With 99 models, we're only going to focus on a few key ones today. And maybe we'll bring back some kind of blown out series on Rolf's book. But today, Mike, you're right. Let's get into a little bit of the biases from Rolf's book that are going to help us really understand this idea of self-deception biases and social proof deception biases. So first off, we're going to break in with Productivity Game, who's going to introduce us to 4 key elements from the book all around this idea of self-deception biases.
Clustering illusion. Flip a coin and chart the result by moving a line up 1 for heads and down 1 for tails. After 10 coin flips, you may have a chart that goes up and to the right after a string of heads. Now, it would be foolish to bet that you would continue seeing more heads than tails, since the outcome is 50-50, and a sample size of 10 doesn't mean much. But people make small sample size bets all the time. A person moves to a city with long winters after spending just 5 days in that city in the middle of summer. A person buys a $2,000 treadmill after using a treadmill at the gym just a handful of times. Or a person sells all their investments based on a 30-day trend when they have a 30-year investing time horizon. Our brains love to find meaning in short-term trends and rush to conclusions. We irrationally make big decisions based on small data sets, especially if a data set supports something we want to do. Which brings us to the next item on our checklist, confirmation bias. I used to stare at stock price charts for hours, searching for buy and sell signals. If I thought the market was going to go up, I always found a bullish price pattern that signaled a buy. And when I thought the market was ready for a correction, I always found a price pattern that confirmed my fears. Warren Buffett once remarked, "What a human being is best at doing is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact." If there's something you feel like doing, you will almost always find enough evidence to support doing it. If you're in the market for a new house, and you have a good feeling the instant you walk into an open house, you'll suddenly expand your pros list for that house, and the cons, like a long commute to work or a noisy road behind the house, will suddenly matter less. The next item on our checklist is special case syndrome. Business leaders go forward with costly projects despite knowing similar projects have failed because they insist the next project is a special case or an exception. Investors routinely buy at peak euphoria and sell when everyone else is panicking because they insist that what's happening now is unlike anything in financial history. But as Sir John Templeton famously said, the 4 most expensive words in the English language are "this time it's different." Our next bias is not invented here syndrome. One evening, author Rolf Dobelli tried a new sauce recipe to go with the fish he was cooking. When his wife took a bite, she made a face and slowly scraped the sauce off the fish. Rolf didn't think the sauce was that bad. 2 weeks later, his wife was cooking fish and made 2 sauces, her tried and true sauce and a sauce from a famous French chef. Rolf tasted the second sauce and thought it was absolutely awful. After dinner, his wife confessed the second sauce was not from a famous chef. It was the sauce that Rolf made 2 weeks earlier. When we have an idea for a new business or a family vacation, we feel it is far more brilliant than it actually is, and we are far more likely to commit to that idea than if it came from someone else. Rolf says, we are drunk on our own ideas. To sober up, take a step back every now and then and examine their quality in hindsight. Which of your ideas from the past 10 years were truly outstanding? Exactly.
Oh, man. Boy, have we got some insights here. So, drunk on your own ideas. This one stands out in the small sample size.
Yep.
How many times have you been pitched an idea by someone drunk on their own idea, saying, "Oh, I've got this great idea. Let me tell you about it." And you know that they haven't talked to anybody else or they're not listening to anybody else. And they pitch you and you're like, that sounds awful. So being drunk on your own ideas, I think we're all a bit guilty of that. I mean, the other one, obviously, the sample size. Like someone asks two people and thinks that's how the world thinks, right?
Mm.
But I think the point here that this illustrates is the feeling I had when I read the book, which was like, oh my gosh, as he reveals each of these new paradigms and mental models and ways to think, you realize, oh my gosh, we are such terrible decision machines. Like humans, really, we're full of all these problems. Like we get affected by our emotions and the risk. And what a perfect story of Ralph cooking for his wife. And he thought that the second sauce was disgusting, but it was exactly the same as his recipe that they'd had 2 weeks before. And he couldn't, the author himself couldn't see how self-deceived he was about his own bias. Does that not tell you everything about, as long as you realize that we're very bad decision machines and take a step back and just try and be more self-aware? I think that's the big call to arms here, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. Being self-aware and also maybe double clicking or, sense checking what you've decided upon. I like the two that you called out, Mike, as well. The not invented here and this clustering illusion. I have actually been guilty of making a sauce that I claimed was pretty good. And my wife also saying, what are you talking about? You don't add, vinegar to salmon, that sort of thing. And you do have to check yourself. Sometimes I'm going to be typically doing this sort of behavior when I feel very defensive. Maybe that's a product of being angry, or maybe it's a product of feeling anxious or insecure, whatever it might be. And often, obviously, on the show, we've spoken about journaling and reflection and so on. When you do look back at your behavior when perhaps you defended a source that was absolute garbage, or when you're only taking the point of view of maybe 2 or 3 people instead of going out and getting a full sample size of information, you do almost have to take a step back and think, okay, am I doing this properly?
Yeah.
Am I really doing this with all the diligence that I should do?
Yeah.
Because more often than not, at least in my case, I've probably utilized some of those biases when I don't want to go further and I don't want to have to go out and talk to 20 people, or I don't want to have to admit that I'm no good in the kitchen.
Totally. I totally know what you mean there. So where I would take this, Mark, is where do I see this kind of self-deception the most? And what comes to my mind in my professional work is the amount of people working on early stage businesses who are self-deceived. What I mean is, it's the classic thing. Someone comes to me with an idea and says, here's what I'm thinking. And I'm like, okay, how many people have you interviewed who are customers? How many people have you surveyed? How many prototypes have you shown them and asked them for feedback on? And it blows me away, Mark, the amount of people who say less than 10, hardly any, or scarily 0. And that means that, like, they're not only self-deceiving, but their chances of creating a great product are like 0, because if you haven't validated the problem and that you've got a potential solution, why would you build anything? Why would you be in this guesstimation world? Yeah. Like, surely we only want to spend our time doing stuff that's well thought out, be it a product or decisions in our personal lives. And I think this book just illustrates and makes us self-aware. It's a big wake-up call, Yeah. It's a big cold bucket of water going, boom, you're full of these biases. Now, the crazy thing is, Mark, we're riffing here and exploring these self-deception ones. But the crazy thing is, Ralph has got a whole bunch more as well, right?
I know he does. This next clip that we're going to have leans in, if we've just understood a little bit about the ways that our brains maybe naturally over life build these biases around self-deception. You're right, Mike. We're now going to take it into a little bit of a different direction. We're now going to lean into some of the biases that Rolf calls out within his book that are more around social proof deception. So let's hear from Productivity Game again. He's going to break down 4 more of these elements with us within the book to help us understand some more fantastic biases.
It's survivorship bias. Behind every successful person is a graveyard of unsuccessful people who are silent. When you drive around town, you see hundreds of stores open for business, making money, but you don't see all the businesses that came before them that failed. If you drove through town one day and suddenly saw that half the stores were abandoned, representing the average failure rate of a business after 5 years, you might think twice before quitting your job and investing your life savings in a brick-and-mortar business. If you took up golf after watching golf on TV, you would have unrealistic expectations and probably quit after a few weeks. Golf on TV shows the best shots from the best players who are having one of their best days on the course. As a new golfer, you would probably enjoy the game more and continue playing if you saw a highlight reel of terrible shots and started learning with realistic expectations. Next up, selection factor neglect. Unless you're around 6 foot 2 inches tall, have a long torso, big feet, and an arm length to height ratio higher than most people, dedicating your life to becoming an Olympic freestyle swimmer will be a very frustrating endeavor, because you can put in more work than someone with a swimmer's body and never defeat them in a race. We want to believe that we can succeed with hard work alone, so we look past prerequisite traits, i.e. selection factors, of top performers in select fields. We can learn most things and excel in many fields, but we must be careful not to emulate someone with extreme traits. Next up, outcome bias. The only thing worse than emulating an extreme outlier is emulating someone who got extremely lucky. A famous hedge fund manager can make a string of dumb decisions and get rich, but years later, that same investor will make similar decisions and lose everything. Luck plays a bigger part in success than we'd like to admit. If we picked a random group of 100 successful entrepreneurs, only one, on average, will have success starting another business. In the book, Rolf says, you would assume that such self-starters, who are blessed with talent, a good personal network, and solid reputation, will be well equipped to found numerous other startups. But repeat success is rare because luck often plays a bigger role than skill does. Groupthink. Our doubts get washed away when we see a room full of people arrive at the same conclusion, but the consensus we see is likely an illusion. If the room had just one attractive and confident person in position of authority who told a great story, they could have persuaded the group to take their side. However, if the group had not been subject to that persuasive leader and anonymously wrote down their conclusions on a sheet of paper, there probably wouldn't be consensus. Never underestimate the power of a persuasive person to get a group of people to make irrational decisions. Now, the next time you're about to commit your limited time and hard-earned money to an endeavor, quickly check off the 8 items on the cognitive bias checklist. When you are aware of your cognitive biases, you are more likely to embrace trial periods, create backup plans, and predetermine a stopping point just in case your forecast is wrong. Since you now know that cognitive biases are prone to lead to over-optimistic forecasts, it's safe to assume that what you want to do will take twice as long and the payoff will be half as rewarding as you think. If something might take twice as long and yield half the reward, but you still deem it worth doing, it is probably a worthwhile endeavor.
Let me hit you with that list. Here we go. This is the bias checklist. Am I overestimating my knowledge or abilities? Am I seeking information that only confirms my existing beliefs? That one's a huge one. Is my decision being influenced by the first piece of information I received? Am I basing my judgment on recently or easily recalled examples? Am I sticking with a decision because of past investments, not current value? Am I underestimating the time and resource needed for this? Am I following the crowd without questioning it? Am I judging someone or something based on one good trait? I mean, I can just go on and on. These are the sort of things you can practically do from reading this book. And isn't it interesting, as I was reading of those, how many of those did you kind of, Mark, go, ooh. Yeah, I've kind of done that. Like, it's a little... It's a little bit uncomfortable, right?
I mean, our viewers probably couldn't see my screen, but I was wincing, Mike. Because again, as we're finding out with this book, there are so many biases that you're not necessarily even aware of until somebody points it out. And you realize, oh yeah, I've totally done that before. I am influenced by that first piece of evidence. Maybe because it's easier.
It's
or
like
maybe because it agrees with me.
Yeah, each one of those, you're like, guilty, guilty is charged, guilty. But it kind of unravels a little bit. This is what I wanted to really point out about the book. like it's wonderful in so many ways, but it's quite confronting because you realize how flawed your thinking truly is.
Yeah. The one that's really stands out to me is the survivorship bias, which I think is quite an interesting one, Mike, because I think particularly when we're looking at social media, overnight abs, and so on, I think people compare themselves to what they can see online, and people might look at, an individual like Federer and think, oh, okay, well, he is an amazing tennis player. He's the best person in the world. Um, how can I become like him? But the truth is, it takes hard work, as we were learning from Productivity Games clip just then. And a stat that I think maybe we've spoken about on the show before is that Roger Federer only won 55% of all the points he ever played. 55%. So even though he dominated, tennis for a couple of decades, he still only won by just over 50%.
Let me do a build. So take the professional sports concept and apply survivorship bias. Now, what's so cool in life is all the young boys and girls that see professional athletes and say, I want to be like them. That's all great. But the survivorship bias is what people don't realize when they say, I want to be like Serena Williams or I want to be like Tiger Woods. What they don't see is statistically, for every Tiger Woods, there's literally millions of people that failed. It's just like all the kids right now that look at the NBA and go, I want to be in the NBA. Do you realize the statistical chance of making it is so low? And if you actually knew that, and in some ways it's kind of good that we don't, because you want people to hope and to dream. But the reality is, like, when we are making big decisions, to be aware that actually what is the true likelihood, as opposed to, oh, I see lots of pro sports on telly. Great. There's lots of pro sports opportunities. But actually, if someone does the math, what are the chances? Like, this is really fun. Let's try and actually apply your Federer thing. What do you think? Statistically, what are the chances of being a pro tennis player?
Oh, I mean, I suppose it's going to be a surprisingly low percentage, because I heard that tennis is now more popular in the world than ever before.
Okay.
So hit me. What statistic? What have you found?
Okay, here we go. So what I want you to do though is it like 1 in 1,000?
Okay. I'm going to say it's 1 in every 100,000.
Okay. Well, you're saying like, okay, 1 in a, okay. Let's have a look here. I'm asking the famous ChatGPT to give me a number. It's like, this is like, it's so funny. Even ChatGPT is like, dude, the number you're asking for is like so insanely low.
Oh.
Okay. So it says the chances of becoming a professional tennis player are extremely low. It's almost impossible to calculate. But at a minimum, it's one chance in every 100,000. And it's basically saying, it's so low, I can't even give you a proper number.
Yeah.
So this would be not 1%, not 0.1, but it's 0.001% chance. That's the truth of it.
And you're right, Mike. We're not trying to discourage all of our aspiring tennis pros who are listening to the Moonshot Show from giving it a go. I think you're right. The caveat here is we've got to go in with open eyes.
Yeah.
You've got to go in with maybe a sense of dreaming, but also a sense of realism. You need to understand, as we heard, from the outcome bias as well, there is a part to play for luck.
Yeah, sure.
Not every entrepreneur can have 2 home runs every time.
Listen, the number of entrepreneurs that really struggle on their second venture, and it's quite confronting because they've overestimated their own role in their first success and not realize that statistically the luck of meeting the right person, or they lucked timing around a particular event that was pivotal. So that can be quite challenging for them. But here's the thing though, Mark, what I would say is if you use something like the social proof deception bias and you're aware of it, you said this really interesting thing, like eyes wide open. I think that sets you on the stage to be resilient and courageous because you know the challenge is coming. You know obstacles are coming. You know the valley of darkness is a guaranteed thing, because I think part of what trips us up in life is we weren't expecting the challenge because we thought it would be easy. So we abandoned ship in like pure flight or fight responses. But we can manage that way better if we're way more realistic and we don't fall for the deception of social proof, right?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And also, I think the value of knowing your, you've got to be able to ask yourself twice. You know, I know we've said it on the show before, but I love to make a decision and sleep on it
Oh, totally.
and see if my opinion changes by the time I wake up.
Yes.
Because I find that there are, as you've already said, so many distractions in life, but also there are so many inspirations.
Yes.
So when I talk to a colleague or I read a really insightful or engaging blog post or email, or if I hear a bit of music, I might change my mind and think, actually, this could be worth
Spot on.
giving it another go, right?
Spot on. So there's a build I would do on that. So having read the book, I would say what Rolf would recommend to us is a few additional steps. So let's say you're like sleep on it. So you've got to your decision. There's a couple of things you could do before that. The first thing you would do is challenge the data. So early in the decision process, when someone says, here's a fact or here's what's happening, you can say, well, really? Prove it? Show it to me. Let's check. Let's verify that. Then you could ask which model of thinking would be most appropriate for this kind of problem. Then when you have your solution, then you sleep on it. So challenge the data, ask which model, sleep on it. Guaranteed better, much better decision, much better path to action. Mark, I want to challenge you and say, what is the homework assignment out of the 99 possible homework assignments? What's yours?
Look, I think the real insight today was this idea of the book being your manual to making decisions, but also specifically thinking clearly. Mike, for me, I am definitely guilty of the clustering illusion as well as confirmation biases. I think my homework will be really challenging myself when it comes to what's the word? Noticing my first opinion, but not immediately saying that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah.
You know, it's like noticing how you feel with a bit of mindfulness. Instead, I think, right, this is my decision right now. Let's put it on ice.
Yeah.
Let's relax, go for a run, go for a walk, whatever it might be. Or, as you've just said, ask which model I can use to test it.
Yeah.
That'll be my homework, really. What about you, Mike?
Oh, man, just pausing before really entering into any thought process and just saying, you know, which paradox or bias am I likely to suffer here? Yeah. My one is always over optimism, right? Bit of wishful thinking. It'll be great. Let's do it. Let's go. Woohoo. And then you're like, ooh, this is a lot harder than I expected.
Mike, are you saying that you're giving up your dreams of becoming a professional tennis player after the show today?
Listen,
I want you to be a dreamer.
I was in Europe last week playing padel, so my actual ambition is now to be a professional padel player. I can say that, shout out to my good friend Joost, him and I played two young stallions and we won.
Bingo.
They did run us around the court and we were like a little bit sore and stiff the following day, like two geriatrics walking around with sore backs and arms, but we got the victory. So that's what really matters.
Well done. That's the key takeaway today.
There you go. There you go. Mark, I want to say a big thank you to you and a big thank you to you, our listeners, our viewers, and our members too. Here for show 271, where we studied The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. And what a book it is. And we really kind of went through a couple of big ideas, which were just like a taster menu of what the book offers in its 99 concepts, models that you can use in your daily life. And we really learned how to overcome the social proof deception that we all experience as a bias, but also overall, we are self-deceiving all the time, and there's all these pitfalls that we can run into. So if you're self-aware, you'll challenge the data, you'll ask which model is best. And as Mark advised us, we'll sleep on it so we can make a better decision in life. And I think that is a true path to being the best version of yourself, which is what we're about here on the Moonshots podcast. That's a wrap.